Hello and welcome to another video. I'm Twisted Jonathan, and today we will be taking a nostalgic stroll through one of the hottest FPS game series of the early 2000s, Medal of Honor. In this video, we will be going over every release of the series, describing the game's story and features unique to each title. After we get done listing off and describing each release, we will discuss how the series took over the FPS genre, and, unfortunately, with all great things, Medal of Honor has taken a turn for the worse, so we will sadly go over the fall of the series. Sit back and enjoy this nostalgic video essay, The Rise and Fall of Medal of Honor. So let's get started with the genesis of the series. Medal of Honor, released in late 1999 in North America and 2000 in other regions, was one of the first major console shooters to immerse players in World War II. Developed by DreamWorks Interactive and published by Electronic Arts, it stood out because it blended cinematic storytelling with historically inspired gameplay, at a time when most shooters were still focused on sci-fi or over-the-top action. You play as Lieutenant Jimmy Patterson, an American soldier who gets recruited into the Office of Strategic Services, or the OSS, the precursor to today's CIA. Patterson's mission takes him behind enemy lines in Nazi-occupied Europe, where he has to sabotage operations, steal intelligence, and fight German soldiers in tense, often stealthy, firefights. The story was co-created by filmmaker Steven Spielberg, who had just finished work on Saving Private Ryan, so the game shares that same gritty, grounded vision of World War II. Gameplay-wise, Medal of Honor was a first-person shooter, but designed specifically for the PlayStation controller. Movement and aiming were a little clunky by today's standards, but at the time it was praised for being intuitive on a console. Missions ranged from storming bunkers and rescuing captured allies to sneaking through enemy camps in disguise. It wasn't just about running around and shooting. You often had to think like a covert operative, blending action with espionage. The game's atmosphere was one of the strongest points. It used authentic World War II weapons like Thompson submachine guns, the M1 Garand, and the Colt pistol, and enemies shouted commands in German to make battles feel more realistic. The soundtrack, composed by Michael Giacchino, who would later score films like The Incredibles and Rogue One, gave the game a powerful, cinematic feel, with swelling orchestral themes that made even small firefights feel epic. Visually, it was limited by PlayStation's hardware, but it managed to create believable environments like bombed-out villages, secret Nazi facilities, and dark forests. Even enemy AI was advanced for its time. Soldiers would take cover, flank the player, or call for reinforcements, which was a big step up compared to most shooters of the late 90s. Medal of Honor was a critical and commercial success, kicking off a long-running franchise that would dominate the early 2000s. It directly influenced later series like Call of Duty, and even helped shape how war games were presented, moving away from arcade-style action towards more grounded and historical storytelling. Moving on to the next game in the series, Medal of Honor Underground came out just a year after the original, in late 2000, and it built on everything that made the first game successful, but with a fresh new setting, story, and main character. Instead of playing as an American soldier, you stepped into the role of Manon Baptiste, a young French woman who begins as a member of the French Resistance, and eventually joins the OSS. This was a bold move for the time because it's not only highlighted the Resistance fighters' contribution to World War II, but also featured a female protagonist, in a genre that was mostly entirely male-dominated back then. The story starts in Nazi-occupied France, with Manon helping the Resistance sabotage German operations. After proving her bravery, she's recruited by the OSS and sent across Europe, and even North Africa, on covert missions. You'll infiltrate castles, sabotage U-boats, rescue prisoners, and go up against everything from German soldiers to tanks and armored vehicles. It's a mix of sabotage, stealth, and full-on firefights, with each mission pushing you deeper into enemy territory. Gameplay stayed close to the first Medal of Honor's formula, a first-person shooter tailored to the PlayStation controller, but the level of design was more varied and ambitious. You'd find yourself sneaking through Paris streets, storming desert fortresses, or infiltrating heavily guarded Nazi facilities. Some missions leaned more heavily on stealth, while others demanded all-out combat, which kept things fresh. The atmosphere was once again a huge highlight. Michael Giacchino returned to compose the soundtrack, and he delivered another sweeping orchestral score that gave the game a cinematic, almost movie-like quality. Combined with the authentic World War II weaponry, German radio chatter, and detailed environments, it pulled players right into wartime setting. Visually, Underground squeezed a lot out of the PlayStation's hardware. It wasn't the prettiest game, even for its time, but the environments were distinct and memorable. What really made it stand out was the storytelling. It framed the conflict through the eyes of the resistance, showing not just soldiers on the battlefield, but civilians and fighters, risking everything against overwhelming odds. Critically, Medal of Honor Underground was praised for its bold narrative choice, strong atmosphere, and challenging missions. Some reviewers noted that the controls and graphics were starting to feel dated compared to newer PC shooters. But on console, it was still one of the best war games available. Like its predecessor, it helped solidify Medal of Honor as a leading franchise, paving the way for the massive World War II boom in shooters that followed. Moving on, a title that some of you might actually know pretty well. Medal of Honor Allied Assault was a major leap forward for the series, and one of the most important World War II shooters ever made. Developed by 2015 Inc. and published by EA, this entry was built on the Quake 3 Arena engine, which gave it far more advanced graphics, smoother controls, and bigger, more detailed environments compared to the PlayStation games that came before it. You play as Lieutenant Mike Powell, a soldier in the US Army Rangers, who's also working with the OSS. His story spans the European theater of World War II, and the campaign takes you through 6 major missions broken into multiple levels. You'll infiltrate Nazi bases in North Africa, sneak through occupied France, and even take part in one of the most famous battles ever depicted in a video game, the D-Day landings at Omaha Beach. That Omaha Beach sequence is still remembered as one of the most iconic moments in gaming history. You start crammed in a landing craft with shells exploding all around, then charge onto the beach under relentless German machine gun fire. The chaos, the explosions, the screams of fellow soldiers, it was unlike anything players had ever experienced in a shooter of the time, and it pushed the idea of cinematic gameplay to a whole new level. But Allied Assault wasn't just a spectacle. It balanced intense action with quieter, more tactical missions. Some levels required stealth, like sneaking into a U-boat base, or disguising yourself as an enemy officer to infiltrate Nazi headquarters. Others were large-scale firefights where you'd storm towns, clear bunkers, and work alongside squads of AI-controlled soldiers. The variety kept the campaign exciting from start to finish. Gameplay was tight and responsive. The weapons felt authentic, from the M1 Garand's iconic ping to the power of the Thompson and the precision of the Springfield sniper rifle. Enemy AI was also a big step up. German soldiers would flank, take cover, or call out warnings, making battles more dynamic than ever before in earlier video games. The presentation was top-notch. Michael Giacchino once again returned to score the soundtrack, and his sweeping orchestral music gave the game a cinematic feel that rivaled Hollywood war films. Combined with the detailed visuals, atmospheric sound effects, and realistic mission design, Allied Assault felt like we were stepping into a war movie. Another important piece was multiplayer. Allied Assault included online modes like Deathmatch and team-based objectives, letting players take the fight against each other across recreated World War II battlefields. This feature gave the game lasting replay value and helped establish a template that later shooters like Call of Duty and Battlefield would build on. Critically, Allied Assault was a huge success. Reviewers praised its campaign, atmosphere, and groundbreaking set pieces. It sold millions of copies and is often credited as one of the titles that truly launched the World War II shooter boom of the early 2000s. Many of the developers at 2015 Inc. would go on to form Infinity Ward and create the original Call of Duty, directly carrying over the cinematic design philosophy that Allied Assault pioneered. And now, moving on to my favorite in this entire series. Medal of Honor Frontline, released in 2002 for the PlayStation 2 and later Xbox and GameCube, brought the cinematic World War II shooter experience from PC to consoles in a big way. Developed by EA Los Angeles, it was built on the foundations of Allied Assault, but redesigned from the ground up for a console audience. You play once again as Lieutenant Jimmy Patterson, the OSS operative from the very first Medal of Honor game. This time, his missions focus on sabotaging German operations deep behind enemy lines, with the overarching story of trying to capture a prototype Nazi jet fighter that could turn the tide of the war if it was deployed. Frontline is probably best remembered from its opening mission, the D-Day landing at Omaha Beach. Just like Allied Assault on PC, the game starts you off with storming the beaches under relentless machine gun fire, explosions going off all around, and soldiers falling left and right. For many players, especially on console, this was the first time they'd ever seen something so immersive and chaotic in a video game. It felt straight out of Saving Private Ryan. The campaign takes you across 19 missions spread over 6 operations. You'll infiltrate a U-boat, derail a German supply train, sneak through occupied cities and storm fortresses. The game mixes action-packed firefights with moments of stealth and sabotage, keeping the pace varied and engaging. Gameplay was streamlined for consoles, aiming and shooting was simplified compared to PC shooters, but the missions were designed to feel cinematic, with carefully scripted events and big set pieces. The authentic World War II weapons returned, such as the Thompson, the Bar, M1 Garand, and more, each with satisfying sound effects that made firefights feel impactful. Visually, Frontline pushed the PlayStation 2 hard. The environments were large and detailed for the time, with atmospheric lighting, destructible set pieces, and a sense of scale that immersed players in the war. Enemy AI wasn't perfect, but soldiers would duck behind cover, toss grenades, and try to flank you, adding to the realism. One of the game's biggest strengths, once again, was its music. Michael Giacchino composed the soundtrack, and many fans consider it one of the best video game scores of all time. The soaring orchestral themes gave every mission a cinematic weight. Tracks like Anzio and Arnhem, as well as Operation Market Garden, are still beloved by fans today, including myself. Frontline didn't have online multiplayer, but it did feature a local split-screen mode for some console versions. The heart of the game, though, was always in the single-player campaign, designed to feel like a playable war movie. When it launched, Medal of Honor Frontline received strong reviews. Critics praised its atmosphere, presentation, and especially its opening D-Day level. Some noted that the controls and graphics felt a little dated compared to PC shooters, but on consoles, it stood out as one of the best World War II experiences available at the time. Medal of Honor: Rising Sun. Rising Sun marked a big shift for the franchise. Instead of focusing on Europe like previous games, this entry took place on the Pacific Front of World War II, offering a fresh perspective and new types of missions. Developed by EA Los Angeles, it was the series' first attempt to cover the brutal island-hopping campaign against Japan. You play as a Marine Corporal, Joseph Griffin, who begins his story during the infamous attack on Pearl Harbor. The opening mission drops you right into the chaos. Explosions tearing through battleships, planes screaming overhead, sailors leaping into the water, and you desperately manning anti-aircraft guns to fight back. It was a dramatic and unforgettable introduction, meant to rival the Omaha Beach landings from Frontline. From there, Griffin's journey takes him across the Pacific, from the jungles of Guadalcanal to the treacherous waters of the Solomon Islands, and the massive battle at the bridge over the River Kwai. The missions mix intense combat with sabotage and infiltration. One level might have you rescuing prisoners of war, while another has you sneaking through enemy camps or defending a strategic base from a full-scale assault. Gameplay was built on the same console-friendly shooter framework as Frontline, but Rising Sun expanded from the formula. It added new weapons like the Arasaka rifle and the Type 99 LMG, alongside American classics like the Springfield Sniper and the M1 Garand. The tropical environments were distinct from the European settings, filled with palm trees, swamps, rivers, and makeshift Japanese fortifications. A big feature of Rising Sun was its co-op campaign mode, which let 2 players experience the story together for the first time on console. This was a rare and exciting addition for the time, especially in first-person shooters, and it made the game more memorable for friends who wanted to tackle missions side by side. The soundtrack, once again composed by Michael Giacchino, was sweeping and cinematic, but this time infused with Southeast Asian and Pacific-inspired tones. The score added emotional weight to the story, capturing both the chaos of battle and the quiet moments in between. While the presentation was strong, the game wasn't without issues. Critics praised its ambition and atmosphere, but pointed out the problems with clunky controls, uneven AI, and some technical rough edges. The story was also left on the cliffhanger, teasing a direct sequel that would never materialize, something that frustrated players at the time. Still, Rising Sun sold well, and introduced console players to a whole new side of World War II. For many fans, it stood out because of its co-op mode, and its willingness to explore the Pacific campaign, which is far less represented in shooters at the time. Moving on to something similar, yet different. Medal of Honor Pacific Assault. This was a bold but risky entry into the series. Developed by EA Los Angeles, it returned the franchise to PC after Allied Assault and its expansions had dominated the early 2000s. Instead of retreading Europe again, Pacific Assault focused entirely on the Pacific theater of World War II, just like Rising Sun, but this time with a much grittier and more realistic tone. You play as Private Tommy Conlon, a U.S. Marine who enlists before America's entry into the war. The campaign follows him through the brutal Pacific battles, beginning with boot camp training, then throwing you straight into the chaos of Pearl Harbor. That opening sequence has you fighting through burning ships, rescuing fellow sailors, and manning anti-aircraft guns, as Japanese planes scream overhead. A dramatic, cinematic introduction designed to rival the Omaha Beach missions from earlier games. From there, the story takes you across the iconic Pacific battlegrounds, Guadalcanal, Macon Atoll, Tarawa, and more. Missions combine large-scale firefights with squad-based objectives. Unlike earlier Medal of Honor games, you aren't a lone wolf anymore. You fought along a squad of Marines who could provide cover, throw you ammo, and even call out enemy positions. This squad-based approach was meant to add immersion and realism, though it sometimes slowed down the pacing. Gameplay leaned heavily into the more hardcore survival-focused style. Health didn't fully regenerate like in later shooters. You needed to rely on Navy corpsmen to patch you up. Ammo was scarcer, and weapons had more recoil. The game tried to capture the intensity of jungle warfare, enemies hiding in foliage, ambushes at night, and chaotic firefights with dozens of Marines. Visually, Pacific Assault ran on a new, more advanced engine, and aimed for cinematic-looking, bigger environments, detailed character models, and dramatic lighting. For 2004, it looked impressive, though the performance demands were steep, and many players with mid-range PCs struggled to run it smoothly. Sound design and music once again stood out. Though Michael Giacchino didn't compose this one, the soundtrack still delivered sweeping orchestral themes, mixed with Pacific-influenced motifs. Combined with the screams of battle, the roar of planes overhead, and the crack of rifles in the jungle, it pulls you deep into the setting. Critically, Pacific Assault received mixed reviews. Some praised its ambition, atmosphere, and cinematic representation, while others criticized its technical issues, uneven pacing, and bugs at launch. It was clear EA was trying to push the franchise towards something bigger and more immersive, but the execution wasn't as tight as competitors. Around this time, Call of Duty was quickly rising in popularity, and many players felt Pacific Assault couldn't quite keep up. The next title brings Medal of Honor back to its roots. Medal of Honor European Assault. This was EA's attempt to shake up the formula after Rising Sun and Pacific Assault. Developed by EA Los Angeles, it tried to create more freedom and variety into the series, while keeping the cinematic World War II atmosphere the franchise was known for. This time you play as William Holt, a U.S. Army lieutenant, who also works as a special operative in the OSS. Unlike the lone wolf heroes of earlier games, Holt is framed more like a spy soldier, carrying out missions behind enemy lines across 4 major campaigns: North Africa, the Eastern Front, France, and finally Belgium during the Battle of the Bulge. One of the biggest changes in European Assault was the introduction of open-ended mission design. Instead of moving through strictly linear levels like in Frontline or Rising Sun, you were dropped into larger maps with multiple primary and secondary objectives. You could tackle them in different orders, choosing whether to go straight for the main mission or explore side paths to destroy enemy intel, disable artillery, or rescue captured allies. This gave players more freedom and replayability than the earlier Medal of Honor titles. Another new feature was the adrenaline system. By racking up kills, you filled a meter that, when triggered, gave Holt a short burst of slowed down time, near invulnerability, and powerful shooting. It was a controversial addition. Some players liked the arcade-like intensity, while others felt it clashed with the series' grounded, realistic roots. Gameplay-wise, it stuck to its franchise formula. Authentic World War II weapons like the Thompson, M1 Garand, Sten, and MP40. Intense firefights against waves of German soldiers, and cinematic set pieces like storming bunkers or fighting through ruined towns. AI was improved compared to earlier console entries, and enemies used cover more effectively, though it still wasn't quite at the level of PC shooters of its time. Visually, European Assault was strong for a late-era PS2, Xbox, and GameCube game. Environments were larger, with more detail and destruction effects, and the sound design kept its intensity. Explosions, gunfire, and shouted commands filled every battle. The music, not composed by Michael Giacchino this time, but still orchestral and sweeping, delivered the epic war movie feel fans expected from Medal of Honor. The story was told through the cutscenes, narrated by Holt, giving it a more documentary-style vibe, as if you were reliving the OSS operations from a personal journal. It wasn't the deepest narrative in the series, but it gave structure to the campaign, and tied the globe-trotting missions together. Reception was mixed to positive. Reviewers praised the larger, more open-level design and the freedom to complete objectives in different ways. However, some criticized the short campaign, the lack of polish in certain areas, and the adrenaline feature, saying it felt a little out of place. Still, many players appreciated its fresh take on the formula, and a step forward from the more restrictive style of Frontline and Rising Sun. Next up on this list is a handheld gem. Medal of Honor Heroes. This was a unique entry into the series because it was built specifically for handheld play. Developed by EA Canada, it was designed to capture the cinematic World War II action of the mainline games, but in a format that worked for shorter, portable sessions. The campaign doesn't tell you one long connected story, instead it's more like a collection of missions. You play as 3 different protagonists from earlier Medal of Honor titles: Lieutenant Jimmy Patterson from the original games, Sergeant John Baker from Medal of Honor Allied Assault, and Lieutenant William Holt from European Assault. Each character has their own set of missions across different theaters of war, including North Africa, Italy, and Belgium. The missions are structured more like bite-sized objectives, rather than sprawling levels. You'll sabotage artillery, rescue hostages, defend positions, or assassinate key targets. Each map can be replayed with different goals, so instead of a one long story, Heroes leaned into replayability and portable friendly pacing. It also allowed players to pick up and play just for a few minutes at a time. Perfect for the PSP. One of the biggest selling points was multiplayer. Medal of Honor Heroes supported up to 32 players online, which was a massive number for handheld games in 2006. Players could fight across a variety of maps and modes like Deathmatch, Team Deathmatch, Capture the Flag, and Infiltration. It also supported local ad hoc play, so nearby PSP users could battle without needing an internet connection. At the time, this was groundbreaking for handheld FPS gaming, and gave the PSP some of its most robust multiplayer experiences. Gameplay was simplified to work on PSP's single analog stick. Movement and aiming took some time to adjust, but the controls were intuitive enough once you got used to them. The weapons, as always, were classic World War II arms, M1 Garands, Thompsons, MP40s, bars, with the balanced handling for fast portable firefights. Visually, Heroes looked impressive for the PSP hardware. The character models and environments were scaled down compared to console versions, but the game ran smoothly, and it still carried that familiar Medal of Honor atmosphere. Explosions, gunfires, and orchestral-style music kept the cinematic feel alive, even on a small screen. Reception was generally positive. Critics praised the ambitious multiplayer, the solid mission design, and the way that it managed to shrink the Medal of Honor experience into a portable package. The biggest criticism was the campaign lacked the depth and narrative focus of the console games. Felt more like a set of scenarios than a story-driven war epic. 'Cause it is. Still, as a handheld shooter, it was one of PSP's standout titles. Coming up to the last of the PS2 titles was Medal of Honor Vanguard. This was developed by EA Los Angeles and represented the franchise's last hurrah of the PlayStation 2, with a Wii port released alongside of it. By 2007, shooters like Call of Duty 2 and 3 were already pushing forward on the next-gen hardware, so Vanguard had the tough job of keeping the Medal of Honor name relevant on aging consoles. The story follows Corporal Frank Keegan, a paratrooper in the 82nd Airborne. Unlike the globe-spanning campaigns of earlier entries, Vanguard focuses specifically on airborne operations in Europe. The game begins with the Allied invasion of Sicily in 1943, then follows Keegan through major battles like Normandy, Operation Market Garden, and finally, the crossing of the Rhine into Germany. One of Vanguard's defining features was its airborne insertion mechanic. At the start of certain missions, you'd parachute out of a plane and choose where to land on the battlefield. This gave you a bit of tactical freedom, For example, dropping near heavy weapons for a direct assault, or landing behind cover to approach stealthily. While limited compared to true open-world game design, it was a nice twist that tried to shake up the traditional linear model that was Medal of Honor gameplay. The core combat was familiar. Classic World War II weapons like the Thompson, MP40, M1 Garand, and the STG-44, Vanguard introduced a weapon upgrade system, letting you attach scopes, drum magazines, or grips to improve performance. This customization gave players more control over their arsenal, a feature not commonly seen in Medal of Honor games of the time. On the PS2, this game played much more like earlier entries, with cinematic firefights, linear objectives, and squad support in some missions. On the Wii, Vanguard featured motion control, letting players aim, reload, and toss grenades using the Wii Remote and nunchuck. This was marketed as a more immersive way to experience World War II combat, though opinions were mixed. Some players enjoyed the novelty, while others found the controls clunky. Visually, Vanguard looked solid for a late-era PS2 game, with larger maps, destructible elements, and atmospheric lighting. The Wii version was nearly identical graphically, but tried to make up for it with its unique control scheme. The sound design once again carried the cinematic weight, with booming gunfire, explosions, and orchestral score reminiscent of earlier Medal of Honor titles. Reception, however, was mixed at best. Many critics felt Vanguard didn't innovate enough, and already felt dated compared to what Call of Duty was doing on next-gen systems. Short campaign, predictable AI, and lack of multiplayer depth held it back. Still, some fans appreciated the airborne mechanics and weapon upgrades as small steps towards modernizing the series. Now let's jump into our first PS3 and Xbox 360 title with Medal of Honor Airborne. Airborne was developed by EA Los Angeles and released in 2007 as the franchise's first true next-gen World War II shooter. By this point, Call of Duty was dominating the genre, so Airborne aimed to stand out with a fresh approach, freedom of movement, open-ended missions, and a focus on paratrooper operations. You play as Private First Class Boyd Travers, a paratrooper in the 82nd Airborne Division. The campaign takes you through some of the most iconic operations of the European theater, starting with Operation Husky in Sicily, then moving through Salerno, Normandy, Market Garden, and finally the Battle of Germany itself. The game's signature feature was its airborne deployment system. At the beginning of most missions, you parachute out of a plane and can choose where you land, drop into your squad for a safer approach, or land behind enemy lines for a riskier but more rewarding flanking route. The game marked green landing zones with smoke, but skilled players could steer to rooftops, balconies, or courtyards for a tactical advantage. This design gave each mission a sense of replayability and made Airborne feel much less linear than earlier Medal of Honor games. Combat was more dynamic too. Once on the ground, you had multiple objectives scattered across open maps. Instead of a single straight path, you could complete missions in any order, destroying artillery, clearing bunkers, rescuing allies, with the battlefield shifting based on your choices. The AI was also improved. German soldiers would take cover, flank, and retreat, making firefights feel less scripted. Weapons felt authentic and weighty, with the progression system that rewarded you for using them. The more you fired a gun, the more upgrades it unlocked, like faster reloads, better accuracy, or stability. Classic World War II weapons, like the M1 Garand, Thompson, MP40, and Kar 98K, were all represented, but now they grew with your playstyle. Visually, Airborne looked impressive for 2007. Powered by Unreal Engine 3, the environments were larger and more detailed than the past games, with destructible elements, realistic lighting, and smooth animations. Sound design once again excelled, with explosions echoing across the battlefield, and an orchestral soundtrack heightening the cinematic atmosphere. Despite these innovations, reception was mixed, but kind of positive. Critics praised the airborne drop system, the open-ended mission design, and the sense of freedom it gave compared to more linear Call of Duty campaigns. However, the game was criticized for its short length, repetitive objectives, and somewhat inconsistent pacing. Many players also felt multiplayer, though solid, with modes like Deathmatch, Team Deathmatch, and objective-based battles, didn't stand out in an era when online FPS games were exploding in popularity. Still, Airborne has a cult following today because it was one of the few World War II shooters that really tried something different. The ability to parachute into missions and tackle objectives in your own way made it feel ahead of its time, even if it didn't quite reach the polish of its competition. Now let's take a huge leap forward in setting. Medal of Honor 2010. Medal of Honor was developed by Danger Close Games, formerly known as EA Los Angeles, in partnership with DICE, the studio behind Battlefield. It was designed as a reboot of the franchise, aiming to compete directly with Call of Duty Modern Warfare, which was dominating the FPS landscape at the time. Instead of World War II, this game takes place in the modern-day War of Afghanistan, drawing inspiration from real-world US military operations in the early 2000s. You play through the eyes of multiple characters, including Tier 1 operators, US Army Rangers, and Apache helicopter gunners, experiencing different perspectives of the war. The story follows Task Force 121, an elite special operations group loosely based on the real Tier 1 units. Missions include ambushes in mountain villages, stealth infiltrations, and large-scale firefights against Taliban forces. Unlike the bombastic, globe-trotting style of Call of Duty, Medal of Honor aimed for a grittier, more grounded tone, showing the dangers and moral weight of modern combat. Gameplay is split into two main parts. The single-player campaign, built by Danger Close, which focused on cinematic storytelling and scripted set pieces. It mixed quiet stealth moments with intense firefights, trying to balance realism with blockbuster pacing. The multiplayer, developed by DICE using the Frostbite engine, which felt very much like a hybrid of Battlefield and Call of Duty. It featured smaller maps than Battlefield, but faster-paced, infantry-focused combat. Modes included Team Assault, Sector Control, and Objective Raid. The campaign's tone stood out because it tried to portray the US Special Forces realistically. Missions referenced actual battles, and Tier 1 operators were portrayed as highly professional, not one-man armies. The marketing even worked with the real US military to highlight authenticity, which stirred controversy at the time, especially because one multiplayer faction let players control the Taliban, which was later renamed to the opposing force. That's kinda lame, not gonna lie. Visually, the game used two different engines, Unreal Engine 3 for single-player campaign, and Frostbite 1.5 for the multiplayer. This led to some inconsistency in look and feel, but both showcased sharp detail, dusty Afghan villages, rocky mountains, and intense battle atmospheres. The sound design was another highlight, with realistic gunfire, explosions, and a gritty soundtrack by Ramin Djawadi. The Game of Thrones composer. This really underscored the seriousness of the story. Reception was mixed to positive. The campaign was praised for its emotional tone, authenticity, and intense firefights, though it was also criticized for being short and somewhat linear. The multiplayer was fun, but seemed too similar to other shooters at the time, without being unique enough to identify and compete with Call of Duty or Battlefield. Commercially, the game sold well, with over 5 million copies sold, and successfully relaunched Medal of Honor into the modern warfare setting. However, it didn't quite reach the level of success that EA was hoping for, setting the stage for its direct sequel 2 years later. Last and certainly not least, to some, Medal of Honor Warfighter was developed by Danger Close Games and served as a direct sequel to the 2010 reboot. The game continued the franchise's shift into modern military combat, focusing on Tier 1 operators, elite US Special Forces, and aiming to deliver cinematic action combined with realism. The story follows Preacher, Stump, and other Tier 1 operators as they track a global terrorist organization called Manticore, inspired by real-life counterterrorism operations. Missions take place in a variety of locations around the world, including Somalia, Pakistan, and the Philippines, giving the campaign a globe-trotting feel similar to the modern military shooters of the time. The narrative emphasizes the tension, danger, and moral ambiguity of counterterrorism missions, although many players felt the story itself was somewhat generic. Gameplay retained the dual focus of its predecessor. The single-player campaign was cinematic, with scripted missions, and a mix of stealth, tactical engagements, and high-intensity firefights. The AI had improved slightly compared to 2010, but the missions remained largely linear. Players could rely on squad commands and cover mechanics, but overall the pace emphasized scripted action rather than player freedom. Multiplayer, again, was developed by the Frostbite 2 engine. This was ambitious and featured destructible environments, objective-based modes, and a variety of modern weapons. It included modes like Hot Zone, Warzone, and Team Deathmatch, and it tried to emulate the tactical feel of real-world special operations, with focus on squad coordination and realistic gunplay. One of Warfighter's notable additions was the focus on modern weapon customization and loadouts. Players could choose from dozens of rifles, pistols, and tactical gear, modifying attachments to suit different combat scenarios, and more. This added depth to multiplayer and catered to fans of tactical shooters. Visually, Warfighter was impressive for 2012, leveraging Frostbite 2 to create highly detailed urban and desert environments, dynamic lighting, realistic particle effects, and destructible cover. Explosions, gunfire, and sound design added to the cinematic experience, though some critics noted that the single-player campaign didn't fully take advantage of the engine's potential. Reception was mixed to negative. Critics praised the graphics, audio, and multiplayer design, but heavily criticized the campaign for being short, uninspired, and relying too much on scripted set pieces. Technical issues and bugs at launch further tarnished the game's reputation. Many players also felt that Warfighter failed to differentiate itself from competitors like Call of Duty and Battlefield, leaving it overshadowed despite its pedigree. Commercially, Warfighter underperformed compared to EA's expectations, marking the effective end of the Medal of Honor franchise. This series has remained dormant since 2012, with no official sequels or reboots beyond this point. But hold the phone, everyone. There is, however, one last taste of Medal of Honor, though it doesn't quite hold up the way the name deserves. Medal of Honor Above and Beyond is a virtual reality first-person shooter developed by Respawn Entertainment and published by Electronic Arts. Released on December 11, 2020, it marks the first entry in Medal of Honor's series since 2012's Medal of Honor Warfighter. Set during World War II, players assume the role of an agent in the OSS, engaging in missions across Europe. Players can physically interact with weapons, reload them, and use grenades, providing a hands-on combat experience. Missions include sabotage, stealth, and large-scale firefights with environments ranging from snowy mountains to urban landscapes. Players can climb ladders, operate mounted weapons, and even pilot aircraft in certain sequences. The game boasts high-quality graphics leveraging VR capabilities to create detailed environments. The audio design complements the visuals with realistic soundscapes, enhancing immersion. However, some players have noted that the certain VR mechanics, like climbing and swimming, can feel less polished compared to other titles in this genre. Upon release, Medal of Honor Above and Beyond received mixed reviews. The game was praised for its ambitious VR integration and the scale of its campaign. Some reviewers pointed out issues with pacing, AI behavior, and the overall narrative depth. Despite these critics, the game was recognized for pushing the boundaries of VR gaming and offering a unique experience within the Medal of Honor franchise. Well, that's it. Now that we know every title in the Medal of Honor series, let's go over its amazing rise and unfortunate downfall. Thanks to an emerging FPS market and the popularity of World War II shooters of the time, Medal of Honor was able to create a foothold in the market. As more releases of the series came out, so too did competitors such as Call of Duty and Battlefield, just to name the big two. At the time, Medal of Honor had the advantage of people like Steven Spielberg assisting in creating cinematic masterpieces, and Michael Giacchino making some of the best soundtracks in gaming history. Medal of Honor would dominate the FPS genre for basically the entire PS2 era, by constantly pushing innovation and creating fun games that people like me would look back onto with nostalgia for the good days. I would remember sneaking into the living room and hoping that the absolutely deafening PS2 startup sound wouldn't wake my parents up at 6 a.m., just so I could get a few missions in on Medal of Honor Frontline or Rising Sun. I remember losing my memory card, and just leaving my PS2 running all night and hoping the console wouldn't freeze so I didn't lose my progress. I'm sure my parents weren't very happy with that electricity bill at the end of the month because that probably cost them. I too would soon forget about the Medal of Honor series due to the rise of Call of Duty and Battlefield, just like I'm sure you, yes you, watching this video did. We all left this iconic series as soon as Call of Duty Modern Warfare came out in like 2008, so unfortunately it fell to the wayside. Sadly, the risen have to fall, and no truer example comes to mind than this series. I haven't even heard of the newer games that came out in 2012 and 2020 until doing research for this video. As the Call of Duty and Battlefield franchises were rising to its amazing heights that they are now, Medal of Honor was just a series of nostalgic afterthought. Maybe they'll make a comeback, but the only buzz I've heard is that there's a plan on an Allied Assault remake using the Unreal Engine 5. But that's only talk at this point. If you want another Medal of Honor game, let me know in the comments below. And tell me what kind of game it should be, whether it should be another World War II game, go back to the War on Terror, or if they should jump into the near future style like we've been seeing with recent FPS games. Well, there you have it, a total retrospective of one of my favorite franchises from my childhood. If you enjoyed this video, let me know in the comments below. If you have a video suggestion, let me know as well. If you haven't already, like the video and subscribe to the channel. As this channel continues to grow, I get more motivation to create more videos. So thank you so much for watching and growing my motivation. I've been Twisted Jonathan, and maybe I'll see you again real soon. Bye!